In the summer of 1944, the European sky was alive with thunder. Not from the storms of nature, but from a machine. A machine that roared, climbed, and dived with brute force and unshakable purpose. It was called the Thunderbolt, the P-47, and behind its engine roar lay a different kind of battle. A war of factories, contracts, and corporate ambition. This is the story of how a small aviation company in Long Island rose to power. How Republic Aviation and its army of engineers and workers forged an industrial empire to feed the war. It's a story of design genius, economic risk, and the business of war itself. A web of contracts and supply chains that stretched from Manhattan to Minnesota, from corporate boardrooms to factory floors. It began long before the war. In the depths of the Great Depression, Alexander de Seversky, a Russian-born pilot and World War I veteran, founded a company with a dream to build the fastest fighters in America. "I don't build machines," he said. "I build freedom for the sky." By 1939, his company, Seversky Aircraft, had been renamed Republic Aviation, and a new engineer was about to change its fate forever. Alexander Kartveli, brilliant, restless, and driven, sketched aircraft designs on train rides between factories. One evening in 1940, as the world marched towards war, he began to sketch something different, a fighter so large, so powerful, that many thought it impossible. A fighter built not for beauty, but for survival. "If it comes home with holes in its wings," he said, "then I have done my job." Kartveli's creation would become known as the Thunderbolt, a juggernaut of metal and fire. Some pilots simply called it the Jug. Republic was still a small player in the aviation world. When Kartveli brought his blueprints to Washington, some Army officials shook their heads. The plane was too heavy, too complex, and too expensive. But Republic took a gamble. They built the first prototype on their own funds. And on the 6th of May 1941, the XP-47B took to the air. It was monstrous and magnificent. 20,000 pounds of steel, rivets, and power driven by a Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine. In that moment, the age of industrial air power was born. December 7th, 1941, America entered the war. Within weeks, Republic Aviation was awarded contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars, a sum unimaginable for its size. The company's factories in Farmingdale, Long Island, expanded overnight. Men and women poured through the gates, forming shifts that never slept. But even this was not enough. The War Department demanded more planes, hundreds every month. So Republic built another plant, this time in Evansville, Indiana, a city that would soon become an industrial miracle. Before the war, Evansville was a quiet river town on the banks of the Ohio. But when the first P-47 contract arrived, its streets filled with opportunity. Within months, an army of workers, men and women, transformed cornfields into assembly lines. Over 6,000 Thunderbolts would emerge from those lines, each one a monument to industrial coordination. "They told me I'd be painting wings," she said. "I didn't know I was painting history." Evansville became a city of night shifts and steam, of cafeterias serving meals at midnight and mothers carrying lunch pails beside their sons. At its peak, 250 local companies fed the supply chain, producing valves, wiring, gauges, and hydraulic pumps. And from those contracts came wealth, over $600 million wartime dollars for southern Indiana alone. Money that would reshape families, build homes, and create a new middle class long after the war was over. A P-47 was more than an aircraft. It was an ecosystem of American industry. The engine came from Pratt & Whitney in Connecticut, propellers from Curtiss Electric in Buffalo, tires from Goodyear, hydraulics from Eaton, pumps from Kohler, filters from Purolator, and adhesives from a company called 3M, a name that would later find its way into homes around the world. The Thunderbolt was a masterclass in logistics, a testament to how America's capitalist engine could be harnessed for war. Contracts spread across every state ensured political support, economic revival, and jobs by the hundreds of thousands. It was simple, one executive said. You wanted the government to buy your plane. Then you made sure every senator had a factory in his district. That was the business of war, a machine as powerful as the engines it built. At its peak, Republic Aviation was producing 28 aircraft a day. The cost of each Thunderbolt was just over $80,000, roughly $1.3 million today. And yet the profits were immense. For every plane built, companies down the chain earned steady revenue, their names quietly etched into the ledgers of wartime America. But beyond profit was patriotism. Posters called for production for victory. Women painted rivets red, white, and blue for luck. And in cafeterias, managers handed out war bond leaflets with pay envelopes. We weren't just making planes, one worker said. We were fighting Nazis with wrenches. Each worker became part of a collective myth, the idea that American industry was invincible. And in many ways, it was. Europe, 1943. The Thunderbolt arrives on the front. Pilots marvel at its size, its weight, its thick wings and bubble canopy. They called her a flying tank, one pilot said. She took hits that would tear another bird in half, and still brought you home. The Thunderbolt was fast enough to chase the enemy and strong enough to dive through flak. It became the workhorse of the 8th Air Force, escorting bombers deep into enemy territory, then swooping low to strike trains, bridges, and convoys. By the war's end, it had flown 500,000 missions and dropped over 130,000 tons of bombs. And every time one returned home with holes in its wings, factory workers cheered. For each plane saved a pilot, and each pilot saved a story. The Thunderbolt was more than a weapon. It was a symbol. Newsreels showed lines of planes rolling off factories with headlines, "America's Jug, the fighter that won the sky." By the end of 1944, the war machine was in full motion. Republic Aviation had become one of the largest aircraft manufacturers in the world. The Thunderbolt dominated the skies of Europe and the Pacific. But behind the victories, another battle was being fought. The fight for contracts, profits, and survival in a world that was about to change. When peace came in 1945, factories that had once thundered with engines fell silent. The flood of government contracts stopped overnight. Workers went home, managers closed ledgers. And for many, the question was simple: what happens now? For Republic Aviation, the answer was to adapt. They tried turning their wartime expertise towards civilian planes, small, elegant aircraft for peacetime America. But the public didn't want flying boats or private seaplanes. They wanted cars, homes, and refrigerators. Across the country, thousands of wartime suppliers faced the same reality. Companies that had lived off the war effort had to reinvent themselves or disappear. Some succeeded, many did not. In Evansville, the great Thunderbolt plant slowed to a halt. Its once roaring assembly lines grew quiet. The workers who had built thousands of aircraft now went back to their pre-war trades: mechanics, farmers, clerks. Yet the skills they had learned would remain. For many, those years in the factory were the best paid, most empowering years of their lives. The story of post-war America is not only about peace, but transformation. The precision machining, material science, and logistics born in wartime became the foundation of modern American industry. Companies like 3M, General Electric, and Pratt & Whitney emerged stronger than ever, armed with new technologies and management systems honed in war. The same supply networks that once delivered engines and weapons now delivered cars, washing machines, and radios. The war had not only built America's military, it had built its middle class. At the center of this transformation was the Thunderbolt's DNA, a symbol of mass production, power, and reliability. The aircraft that had once carried bombs now carried lessons that reshaped an entire economy. Republic Aviation continued to evolve. In the late 1940s, it developed the F-84 Thunderjet, one of America's first jet fighters. Then came the F-105 Thunderchief, faster, sleeker, deadlier. Each design carried echoes of the P-47, its toughness, its industrial lineage, its bold name, Thunder. But progress came with a cost. The age of the jet required massive capital, new technologies, and even larger factories. By the 1960s, Republic could no longer compete alone. In 1965, the company merged with Fairchild Aircraft. The name Republic slowly disappeared from factory gates. Yet the spirit of the Thunderbolt never vanished. It lived on in the A-10 Thunderbolt II, a ground attack jet built to survive anything just like its predecessor. Pilots affectionately called it the Warthog. It carried the same soul, resilience, strength, reliability. The business of war had evolved, but its heartbeat remained the same. Across decades, defense contracts continued to fuel America's industrial base. Lockheed, Boeing, Northrop, General Dynamics, all descendants of the wartime boom. The Cold War ensured the factories never slept, and behind every new fighter, missile, or carrier was the same invisible engine: profit. Historians estimate that more than half of the Pentagon's annual budget still flows directly to private contractors. The cycle continues: innovation, production, dependence. The very structure that began with the P-47 supply chain now defines a trillion-dollar economy. When we look at the Thunderbolt today in museums, at air shows restored by volunteers, we see more than metal. We see a monument to human effort, ingenuity, and ambition. We see the spark that turned America into the industrial superpower of the 20th century. The P-47 was not just a machine of war. It was a business venture that mobilized millions, taught logistics at an unimaginable scale, and proved that in America, industry could move mountains when united by purpose. As its engines roared across the skies of Europe, they echoed a truth that still resonates today: that the machinery of war has always been entwined with the machinery of progress. Factories that built weapons would later build peace. Men and women who riveted armor would later build cars and homes. And the companies that made engines of destruction would later power the dreams of a new world. From the fire of conflict came prosperity, fragile but real. War built America's industrial empire, but peace refined it. The balance between the two, and between creation and destruction, defines the nation's story. In the end, the P-47 Thunderbolt is more than a relic. It is a reminder that every victory in the air was also a victory of organization, innovation, and belief. The belief that a nation's factories, its workers, and its will could rise together to meet the impossible. And when we hear its engines today restored and soaring over a quiet field, we are hearing history itself. The sound of a people who turned chaos into creation, metal into might, and war into the foundation of a new world. That is the legacy of the Thunderbolt, And that is the business of war.